The morning sun was just beginning to rise when Rosa Delgado woke her daughter up. It was 6 in the morning, and the small apartment they lived in was cold. The heater had stopped working 2 weeks ago, and Rosa didn't have the money to fix it. She pulled the thin blanket tighter around her 7-year-old daughter, Elena, and whispered that it was time to get ready. Today was Rosa's first day working at the big house on the hill. Everyone in town knew that house. It belonged to the Mendoza family, one of the richest families in the entire city. They owned businesses, land, and more money than Rosa could ever imagine. And now, she was going to clean their toilets and wash their dishes. Rosa had no choice. Her husband had left them 3 years ago, disappeared one night, and never came back. She had worked at a factory for a while, but it closed down. Then she worked at a restaurant, but they cut her hours. Now this job at the Mendoza house was the only thing standing between her daughter and hunger. Elena didn't complain when her mother woke her up early. She never complained. Even at 7 years old, she understood things that other children her age didn't have to understand. She knew why her mother cried sometimes at night when she thought Elena was asleep. She knew why they ate rice and beans almost every single day. She knew why her shoes had holes in them while other kids at school had new ones. The bus ride to the Mendoza house took 45 minutes. Rosa held Elena's hand the whole way. She had asked her new employer, Mrs. Mendoza, if she could bring her daughter along after school and on weekends. She explained that she had no one to watch her, no family nearby, no money for a babysitter. Mrs. Mendoza had agreed, but her voice on the phone made it clear that the child better not cause any trouble. When they finally arrived at the house, Elena's eyes went wide. She had never seen anything like it. The house was huge, bigger than any building she had ever been inside. It had white walls that seemed to glow in the sunlight, tall windows that sparkled like diamonds, and a garden full of flowers that looked like something from a picture book. There was even a fountain in the front yard with water dancing up into the air. Rosa squeezed her daughter's hand and told her to stay quiet and not touch anything. Elena nodded. She would do whatever her mother said. Inside, the house was even more beautiful. The floors were made of shiny wood that reflected the light. There were paintings on the walls. Real paintings, not posters like the ones Elena had seen in stores. Everything smelled clean and fresh, like flowers and something sweet she couldn't name. Mrs. Mendoza was a tall woman with perfect hair and clothes that looked brand new. She barely looked at Rosa when she explained the work. Clean the bathrooms every day. Wash the dishes after every meal. Do the laundry on Tuesdays and Fridays. Mop the floors every other day. And most importantly, stay out of the family's way. Then Mrs. Mendoza looked at Elena. Her eyes moved up and down, taking in the girl's worn clothes and messy hair. She told Rosa that the child could sit in the corner of the living room, but she must not make noise, must not run around, and absolutely must not touch anything. Rosa promised that Elena would be invisible, and so began their new life. Every day after school, Elena would take the bus to the big house and sit in her corner of the living room. She brought her school books sometimes, or a small notebook where she liked to draw. But most of the time, she just watched. The living room was massive, with soft couches and thick curtains and shelves full of books. But the thing that captured Elena's attention from the very first day was something else entirely. In the corner of the room, opposite to where she sat, there was a piano. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. It was black and shiny, like the surface of a still lake at night. The keys were white and black, perfect and clean, and they seemed to call out to her. She wanted to touch it so badly. Her fingers would twitch sometimes when she looked at it. But she remembered her mother's words. Don't touch anything. So she didn't. The Mendoza family had a daughter named Valentina. She was the same age as Elena, but that was where the similarities ended. Valentina had long, pretty dresses and shoes that matched every outfit. She had toys that Elena had only seen in television commercials. She had her own bedroom that was bigger than Elena's entire apartment. And 3 times a week, Valentina had piano lessons. A teacher would come to the house, a serious-looking man with glasses and gray hair. He would sit next to Valentina at the piano and teach her how to play. Elena would sit in her corner, pretending to read her book, but really, She was watching. She watched every single thing. She watched how the teacher placed his fingers on the keys. She watched how he pressed down gently for soft sounds and firmly for loud ones. She watched how Valentina struggled to remember which notes came next, how she made mistakes and had to start over again and again. Elena listened too. She listened to the music, the way the notes connected to each other. The way a song could start slow and then build up to something exciting. She learned the names of the pieces without anyone teaching her. She heard the teacher say words like Beethoven and Chopin and Mozart, and she kept those names in her heart like treasures. Months passed. Elena never missed a single lesson, even though she was never part of them. She sat in her corner, and she absorbed everything like a sponge soaking up water. At night, when she and her mother went back to their cold little apartment, Elena would do something strange. She had taken a large piece of cardboard from the trash behind a store. With a black marker, she drew piano keys on it, all 88 of them, just like the real piano in the Mendoza house. She counted them carefully, made sure they were the right size, made sure the black keys were in the right places, and then she would practice. Her mother would be cooking dinner or washing clothes in the small sink, and Elena would sit on the floor with her cardboard piano. Her fingers would move across the fake keys, pressing down on nothing but paper and air. But in her mind, she could hear the music. She could hear every note. Rosa watched her daughter do this night after night. It broke her heart in a way she couldn't explain. She saw the hunger in Elena's eyes, the longing for something Rosa could never give her. Piano lessons cost money. A real piano cost more money than Rosa would make in years. Dreams were expensive, and poor people couldn't afford them, but she never told Elena to stop. She never told her that it was pointless, that she was wasting her time. Because Rosa remembered being young once. She remembered having dreams of her own. And even though life had crushed every single one of those dreams, she couldn't bring herself to crush her daughters. So Elena kept practicing on her cardboard piano. And she kept watching Valentina's lessons. And she kept believing that someday, somehow, things would be different. She had no idea that everything was about to change. 5 years passed, and Elena was now 12 years old. She had grown taller, her hair longer, and her understanding of the world deeper. But some things hadn't changed at all. Her mother still worked at the Mendoza house. They still lived in the same small apartment, and Elena still sat in her corner of the living room, watching Valentina's piano lessons with hungry eyes. By now, Elena knew more about piano than most children who actually took lessons. She knew the difference between major and minor keys. She knew what a crescendo was, and a staccato, and a fermata. She knew dozens of pieces by heart. Not because anyone had taught her, but because she had listened so carefully for so many years. Her cardboard piano at home was worn and soft from use, the drawn keys fading from her fingers, pressing on them night after night. But that winter, everything started to fall apart. It began with a cough. Rosa had been coughing for a few days, but she told Elena it was nothing. Just a cold, she said. It would go away. But it didn't go away. It got worse. The cough became deeper, more painful. Rosa started having trouble breathing. She would wake up in the middle of the night, gasping for air, her body shaking with fever. Elena begged her mother to see a doctor, but Rosa refused. Doctors cost money. Medicine cost money. They barely had enough to pay rent and buy food. She couldn't afford to be sick, but the body doesn't care about money. The body does what it needs to do. And Rosa's body was shutting down. One morning, Rosa couldn't get out of bed. Her fever was so high that her skin felt like fire. Her breathing was shallow and ragged. Elena was terrified. She had never seen her mother like this. Rosa was the strong one, the one who worked double shifts without complaining, the one who always found a way to make things work. Seeing her so weak and helpless made Elena feel like the ground beneath her was crumbling. A neighbor finally called for help, and Rosa was taken to the hospital. The doctors said it was pneumonia. Her lungs were filled with fluid. She needed medicine, rest, and time to recover. But even with insurance, there were bills. So many bills. The hospital stay, the medication, the tests. Each paper that arrived in the mail was another weight added to Rosa's already heavy shoulders. She was released after 5 days, but she was still weak. The doctors told her to rest for at least 2 more weeks. No work. No stress. Just rest. But Rosa knew what no work meant. It meant no money. It meant not being able to pay rent. It meant losing everything they had. As little as that was. So she made a phone call to Mrs. Mendoza. She apologized for missing work. She explained she was sick, but would be back as soon as possible. She begged for her job to still be there when she recovered. Mrs. Mendoza was not a warm woman, but she was practical. She told Rosa that she could keep her job, but the house still needed to be maintained. If Rosa couldn't come, then someone else would have to do the basic tasks, and that's when Elena spoke up. She had been listening to the phone call from across the room. Before she could stop herself, the words came out of her mouth. She told her mother to ask if she could help. She was 12 now. She could clean, she could wash dishes, she could do simple things to keep the house in order until her mother got better. Rosa didn't want to agree. The thought of her daughter working as a maid, even temporarily, made her heart ache. But what choice did she have? Pride was a luxury, and they had run out of luxuries a long time ago. Mrs. Mendoza agreed to let Elena help after school and on weekends. She would pay her a small amount, much less than what Rosa earned. But it was something. It would help cover the bills until Rosa could return to work, and so Elena became a worker in the big house on the hill. It was harder than she expected. Her hands, still soft from childhood, became rough and red from scrubbing. Her back ached from mopping floors and carrying laundry baskets. Valentina, who had never paid much attention to Elena before, now looked at her with something like disgust. The maid's daughter was now the maid herself, but Elena didn't complain. Every time she felt tired or sad, she thought about her mother lying in bed at home, struggling to breathe. She thought about the bills piling up on the kitchen table, and she kept working. One Thursday evening, everything changed. Elena had finished her tasks early. She had cleaned the bathrooms, washed the dishes from lunch, and folded a basket of towels. The house was quiet. Mrs. Mendoza had gone to some fancy event in the city. Valentina was at a friend's house for a sleepover. The other staff had left for the day. Elena was alone. She walked through the empty rooms, her footsteps echoing on the wooden floors, and then she found herself standing in front of the piano. It sat there like it always did. Beautiful and silent. The evening light from the window made it glow like something magical. Elena's heart started beating faster. Her hands trembled at her sides. She knew she shouldn't. She knew the rules. Don't touch anything. Stay invisible. Know your place. But she had been invisible for 5 years. She had sat in that corner, and watched and listened, and dreamed for 5 long years. And now she was alone. No one would know. Just one touch. Just one moment. She sat down on the bench. The leather was soft and cool beneath her. She lifted the cover that protected the keys, and there they were. White and black. Perfect and real. Not cardboard, not drawings, real piano keys. She placed her fingers on them gently, like she was touching something sacred, and then she pressed down. The sound that came out was the most beautiful thing she had ever heard. It filled the room, filled her chest, filled her entire being. It was like taking a drink of water after years of being thirsty. She started to play. It was Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. She had watched Valentina struggle with this piece for months. The teacher had played it so many times, demonstrating the correct way, the proper feeling. Elena had memorized every note, every pause, every breath of the music. Her fingers moved across the keys like they had always belonged there. The music flowed out of her, not mechanically like when Valentina played, but with something deeper. Elena poured everything into those notes. The pain of watching her mother suffer, the loneliness of being invisible, the hunger of wanting something so badly for so long. She closed her eyes and let herself disappear into the music. She didn't hear the front door open. She didn't hear the footsteps in the hallway. She didn't know that Mr. Mendoza had come home early from a business trip, that he had heard the piano from outside, and wondered who could possibly be playing like that. He stood in the doorway of the living room, completely frozen. His briefcase slipped from his hand and landed on the floor with a soft thud. But Elena didn't notice. She was lost in the music, in a world where she wasn't poor, where her mother wasn't sick, where she was exactly where she was supposed to be. When she played the final note, she let it hang in the air for a long moment. Then she slowly opened her eyes, and that's when she saw him. Mr. Mendoza was standing there, staring at her with tears running down his face. Elena's blood turned to ice. She jumped up from the bench so fast that she almost knocked it over. Words tumbled out of her mouth. Apologies, explanations, begging him not to fire her mother. But Mr. Mendoza didn't look angry. He looked like someone who had just witnessed a miracle. He took a slow step toward her and asked one simple question. Who taught you to play like that? Elena's voice was barely a whisper when she answered. No one. She had taught herself. She had watched and listened, and practiced on a cardboard piano, in her tiny apartment for 5 years. Mr. Mendoza was quiet for a long time. Then he did something that Elena would never forget. He smiled, wiped the tears from his eyes, and said that they needed to talk to her mother. Elena had no idea that this moment, this single moment of breaking the rules, was about to change everything. The next evening, Mr. Mendoza came to visit Rosa. Elena had told her mother everything that happened. She confessed about touching the piano, about playing the forbidden music, about being caught. Rosa had listened with her eyes closed, too tired and too sick to even be angry. She just held her daughter's hand and waited for the news that they had both lost their jobs. But when the doorbell rang and Elena opened it to find Mr. Mendoza standing there, something felt different. He wasn't wearing the cold expression of a man about to deliver bad news. He was holding a small bouquet of flowers and a bag of groceries. Rosa tried to sit up in bed when he entered, embarrassed that such a wealthy man was seeing their tiny apartment. But Mr. Mendoza just smiled gently and told her to rest. He placed the flowers in a glass of water and set the groceries on the kitchen counter. Then he pulled up a chair next to Rosa's bed and started to talk. He told them about his life before the money. Most people didn't know this, but Mr. Mendoza hadn't always been rich. He grew up poor too, in a small village far from the city. His father was a farmer, his mother a seamstress. They had nothing. But Mr. Mendoza had one gift. He could recognize talent. He could hear music and know immediately if it was ordinary or extraordinary. That gift had led him into the music business when he was young. He became a concert promoter, discovering talented musicians and helping them reach audiences around the world. He made his fortune that way, before eventually moving into other businesses. But music had always been his first love. And what he heard yesterday, he said, looking at Elena, was the most extraordinary thing he had encountered in 30 years. Rosa didn't understand. She looked at her daughter, confused. Elena had never had a single lesson. She had never touched a real piano until yesterday. How could she possibly be extraordinary? Mr. Mendoza explained that was exactly what made it so remarkable. Elena had taught herself to play at an advanced level just by watching and listening. She had memorized complex pieces without sheet music. She had developed technique and emotional depth that trained students struggled to achieve after years of professional instruction. This wasn't just talent. This was something rare, something that shouldn't be wasted. Then he made his offer. He wanted to pay for Elena's musical education, everything, private lessons with the best teachers he knew, a real piano for their apartment, and eventually, when she was ready, enrollment at the National Conservatory of Music, the most prestigious music school in the country. He would cover all the costs, tuition, books, uniforms, everything. The room went silent. Rosa stared at him like he was speaking a foreign language. This had to be a joke. Rich people didn't just offer things like this to maids and their daughters. There had to be a catch. There was always a catch, but Mr. Mendoza seemed to read her thoughts. He told her there was no catch. He wasn't asking for anything in return. He simply believed that talent like Elena's deserved a chance, and he had the means to provide that chance. It would be a waste, he said. A tragedy. To let this gift disappear just because of money. Rosa's eyes filled with tears. She had spent her whole life being told that people like her didn't get opportunities like this. She had learned to stop hoping, stop dreaming, stop wanting things that seemed impossible. And now this man was sitting in her cramped apartment offering her daughter the world. Her pride screamed at her to say no. She had always told Elena that they didn't need charity, that they would make their own way. But when she looked at her daughter's face, when she saw the light in Elena's eyes, the hope that was almost painful to witness, she knew she couldn't refuse. For herself, Rosa would have said no. But this wasn't about her. This was about Elena. This was about giving her daughter the chance that Rosa never had. She said yes. The next 4 years were the hardest of Elena's life. Mr. Mendoza kept his word. A beautiful upright piano arrived at their apartment 2 weeks later. It barely fit in the small space, but Elena didn't care. She would have slept on the floor to make room for it. Her first real piano. Her own piano. She touched the keys every morning when she woke up, and every night before she went to sleep, just to make sure it was real. The lessons began immediately. Her teacher was a stern woman named Mrs. Vega, a former concert pianist who had trained some of the best musicians in the country. She was not warm or encouraging. She was demanding, critical, and sometimes harsh, but she was also brilliant. She saw what Mr. Mendoza saw in Elena, and she was determined to shape that raw talent into something unstoppable. Elena practiced for hours every single day. Before school, she would wake up at 5 in the morning and play for 2 hours. After school, she would practice for another 3 or 4 hours. Her fingers ached. Her wrists hurt. Sometimes she played until her hands cramped and she couldn't move them, but she never stopped. Every time she felt tired, she thought about her mother. Rosa was back at work now, still cleaning the Mendoza house, still scrubbing floors and washing dishes. She came home exhausted every night. But she always smiled when she heard Elena playing. That smile was worth more than any trophy or award. When Elena turned 14, she was accepted into the National Conservatory. It was a dream come true. But it was also the beginning of a nightmare. The other students at the conservatory came from wealthy families. They had been taking lessons since they were 3 years old. They had performed in recitals and competitions. They had parents who were doctors and lawyers and business executives, and they knew immediately that Elena was different. The whispers started on her very first day. That's the maid's daughter. She got in because some rich man felt sorry for her. She doesn't really belong here. Elena tried to ignore them. She focused on her music, on her practice, on becoming better every single day. But the cruelty of teenagers is hard to escape. They laughed at her clothes, which were simple and plain compared to their designer outfits. They mocked her accent, which still carried traces of the poor neighborhood where she grew up. They excluded her from study groups and social gatherings. The worst part was Valentina. Valentina Mendoza had also enrolled at the conservatory. After all, she had been taking piano lessons her whole life. This was supposed to be her path, her destiny. But now Elena was there too, and everyone could see the difference between them. Valentina played correctly. Elena played beautifully. Valentina followed the notes. Elena made the notes come alive. Valentina hated her for it. She had never paid much attention to the quiet girl who sat in the corner of her living room, but now that quiet girl was her competition, and she was losing. Valentina stopped speaking to Elena entirely. She spread rumors about her. She told the other students that Elena was only at the conservatory because her father had bought her way in, that she had no real talent, that she was a fraud. Elena cried many nights during those years. She would come home, close herself in her tiny room, and let the tears fall. It hurt. All of it hurt. She had thought that getting into the conservatory would be the happy ending. She didn't realize it was just the beginning of a different kind of struggle. But every time she wanted to give up, she remembered why she started. She remembered sitting in that corner, watching and dreaming. She remembered her cardboard piano. She remembered her mother's hands, rough and cracked from years of cleaning other people's homes. She had something the other students didn't have. She had hunger. She had purpose. She had a reason to fight that went beyond trophies and praise. She was playing for every person who had ever been told they weren't good enough. She was playing for her mother, so she kept going. She practiced harder than anyone else. She studied longer than anyone else. She poured every ounce of pain and loneliness into her music. And it made her playing deeper, richer, more powerful. By the time she was 16, she was the best pianist in the entire conservatory. Everyone knew it, even if some refused to admit it. Her teachers spoke about her with awe. Concert scouts began to notice her name, and then came the announcement that would change everything: the National Young Virtuoso Competition. It was the most prestigious piano competition in the country, held once every 2 years. The winner would receive a scholarship, national recognition, and the opportunity to perform with the country's top orchestra. It was the kind of opportunity that could launch a career. Elena was selected as one of 5 finalists. So was Valentina. The stage was set for a showdown that no one would ever forget. The competition was only 2 weeks away, and Elena had never worked harder in her life. She practiced 8 hours a day, sometimes more. Her fingers moved across the keys until they were numb. She played the same passages over and over again, searching for perfection in every note, every pause, every breath of the music. She barely ate. She barely slept. Her entire world had shrunk down to the piano and the piece she had chosen to perform. Chopin's Ballade, No. 1-inch G minor. It was one of the most difficult pieces in the entire classical piano repertoire. Most professionals avoided it because of how demanding it was, both technically and emotionally. But Elena had chosen it for exactly that reason. She wanted to show everyone what she was capable of. She wanted to prove that the maid's daughter belonged on that stage. Rosa watched her daughter with a mixture of pride and worry. She could see how hard Elena was pushing herself. She noticed the dark circles under her eyes, the weight she was losing, the way her hands sometimes trembled from exhaustion. She tried to tell Elena to slow down, to take care of herself. But Elena wouldn't listen. She was so close to everything she had ever wanted. She couldn't stop now. What Elena didn't notice was that her mother wasn't looking well either. Rosa had been hiding it for months. The tiredness that never went away. The pain in her chest that came and went. The shortness of breath that made climbing stairs feel like climbing a mountain. She didn't want to worry her daughter. Elena had the competition to focus on. She had her future to think about. Rosa's problems could wait. But the body doesn't care about timing. The body does what it needs to do. It happened the night before the competition. Elena was in her room, going over the sheet music one final time, even though she had memorized every note long ago. She could hear her mother in the kitchen, preparing a simple dinner for them to share. The smell of rice and vegetables drifted through the small apartment. Everything felt normal. Everything felt calm. And then she heard the crash. Elena ran to the kitchen and found her mother on the floor. The pot had fallen from the stove, spilling food everywhere. Rosa was lying in the middle of it all, her face pale, her breathing shallow, her hand pressed against her chest. The next few hours were a blur of panic and fear. Elena called for help. Neighbors came running. An ambulance arrived with flashing lights. Elena held her mother's hand the entire time, telling her to hold on, telling her everything would be okay, even though she didn't know if that was true. At the hospital, the doctors said it was her heart. Years of overwork, stress, and ignoring her own health had taken their toll. Rosa needed surgery, but first, they had to stabilize her. She was awake but weak, hooked up to machines that beeped and hummed in the cold hospital room. Elena sat by her mother's bed all night. She didn't close her eyes, not even for a moment. She just held Rosa's hand and watched her breathe, terrified that each breath might be the last. As the sun began to rise, Rosa opened her eyes and looked at her daughter. Her voice was barely a whisper when she spoke. She told Elena not to go to the competition. She told her to stay at the hospital. She said the competition didn't matter, that nothing mattered except them being together. She squeezed Elena's hand, with what little strength she had, and begged her to stay. Elena felt her heart breaking into 1,000 pieces. This was the moment she had worked toward for 9 years. since she was 7 years old, sitting in the corner of the Mendoza living room, watching and dreaming, since she practiced on a cardboard piano in the dark, since she woke up at 5 in the morning and played until her fingers bled. Everything had led to this competition, to this one chance to show the world who she was, but her mother was asking her to give it up. Her mother, who had sacrificed everything. Her mother, who had worked until her body broke so that Elena could have a chance at a better life. How could she say no to her? Elena sat in silence for a long time. The machines beeped. The sun rose higher. The hours ticked by. And the competition grew closer. And then she made her decision. She leaned down and kissed her mother's forehead. She looked into Rosa's tired eyes and spoke softly but firmly. She told her mother that she was going. Rosa started to protest, but Elena gently stopped her. She explained that she wasn't going for the prize. She wasn't going for the scholarship or the recognition or to prove anything to the rich kids who had made fun of her. She was going for one reason and one reason only. She was going to play for her mother. She told Rosa that everything she had ever accomplished was because of her. Every note she played, every song she learned, every hour she practiced was because Rosa believed in her. Because Rosa worked double shifts so Elena could stay in school. Because Rosa said yes when Mr. Mendoza made his offer, even though her pride told her to refuse. Because Rosa never once told her to stop dreaming. This performance wouldn't be for the judges. It wouldn't be for the audience. It would be for Rosa. Every single note would be a thank you, a love letter, a tribute to the woman who had given her everything. Rosa's eyes filled with tears. She tried to speak but couldn't find the words. So she just nodded, squeezed Elena's hand one more time, and let her go. Elena left the hospital and went home to change. She didn't have a fancy dress like the other competitors would have. She had a simple black dress that her mother had bought her for a school concert 2 years ago. It wasn't designer, it wasn't expensive, but her mother had saved for weeks to buy it, and that made it more valuable than any gown in the world. She looked at herself in the mirror. Her eyes were red from crying. Her face was pale from a night without sleep. She looked nothing like the polished, confident performers she would be competing against. But there was something else in her eyes. Something fierce. Something unbreakable. She had been through too much to give up now. She had fought too hard to let this moment pass her by. Before she left, she arranged for a nurse to bring her mother a tablet so she could watch the competition live stream from her hospital bed. She made the nurse promise to stay with Rosa the entire time, to hold her hand if she needed it. She called the hospital 3 times on her way to the concert hall, just to make sure her mother was okay. When Elena arrived at the venue, her heart nearly stopped. The concert hall was massive. It was the largest, most beautiful space she had ever seen. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. Velvet curtains framed the stage. Hundreds of seats were filled with wealthy patrons, music critics, conservatory directors, and talent scouts. Camera crews were set up to broadcast the event across the country. Elena felt small, smaller than she had ever felt in her life. She saw the other competitors backstage. They all looked perfect. Their hair was styled by professionals. Their gowns probably cost more than her mother made in a year. They chatted with each other casually, like this was just another day. Like they weren't about to perform for the most important audience of their lives. Valentina was there too. She wore a stunning red dress and diamonds in her ears. When she saw Elena, she smiled. But it wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who thought she had already won. She walked over to Elena and whispered something that was meant to cut deep. She said it was cute that Elena had shown up. But maybe next time she should focus on learning how to clean faster, instead of wasting everyone's time. Elena didn't respond. She didn't have the energy for Valentina's cruelty. Her mind was somewhere else entirely. It was in a hospital room across the city, where her mother was lying in bed, watching and waiting and believing in her. One by one, the competitors performed. They were all good. Some were even great. The audience clapped politely after each performance. The judges took notes. Everything moved forward like a well-oiled machine. Valentina performed fourth. Her piece was technically flawless. She hit every note with precision. She followed the dynamics exactly as written. When she finished, The audience applauded warmly. She took her bow with a satisfied smile. And then it was Elena's turn. She walked onto the stage, and immediately the whispers started. People noticed her simple dress. They noticed she had no jewelry. They noticed she looked exhausted and out of place. But Elena didn't hear the whispers. She didn't see the judgmental stares. She just walked to the piano, sat down on the bench, and closed her eyes. In that moment, she wasn't in a concert hall anymore. She was back in her tiny apartment, sitting next to her mother, playing on her cardboard piano while Rosa cooked dinner. She was 7 years old again, full of dreams that seemed impossible. She opened her eyes, leaned toward the microphone, and spoke. Her voice was quiet but clear. It reached every corner of the massive hall. She said, "This is for my mom. She's in a hospital bed right now, but she's watching. Everything I am is because of her." And then she began to play. The first note echoed through the concert hall like a heartbeat. Elena's fingers touched the keys, and something magical happened. The massive room, filled with hundreds of people, went completely silent. Not the polite silence of an audience waiting for music. This was different. This was the silence of people holding their breath, afraid to make a sound, afraid to break whatever spell was being cast on that stage. She played Chopin's Ballade. No one. The piece she had practiced 1,000 times. But tonight, it didn't feel like practice. It didn't feel like a performance. It felt like a conversation, like she was speaking directly to her mother through the music, saying all the things she had never been able to put into words. The opening was slow and gentle, like a whisper. Elena thought about her mother waking her up on cold mornings in their tiny apartment. She thought about the bus rides to the big house on the hill, Rosa holding her hand the whole way. She thought about her mother's tired smile after a long day of work, the way she always found energy to ask Elena about school, about her dreams, about her day. The music grew stronger. Elena's fingers moved faster, the notes building on top of each other like waves rising in the ocean. She thought about the years of struggle, the hunger, the cold nights, the shoes with holes, the other children at school who had so much while she had so little. She poured all of that pain into the keys, and the piano sang it back to the audience. People in the front rows began to lean forward in their seats. They had heard this piece before, many times, performed by skilled musicians from around the world. But they had never heard it like this. This wasn't just technique. This wasn't just hitting the right notes at the right time. This was something raw and real, something that reached into their chests and grabbed hold of their hearts. Elena moved into the most difficult section of the piece. Her hands flew across the keys with speed and precision that seemed impossible. But even in the most technically demanding passages, she never lost the emotion. Every note meant something. Every phrase told a story. She thought about her cardboard piano, that silly piece of cardboard with drawn keys that she had practiced on for years. She remembered how her mother would watch her from across the room, never telling her to stop, never telling her it was pointless. Rosa had believed in her, even when believing seemed foolish. Even when logic said that a poor girl with a fake piano would never amount to anything. Tears began to fall down Elena's cheeks as she played. She didn't try to stop them. She didn't care what she looked like. She was playing for her mother, and her mother couldn't see her tears anyway. Rosa was miles away, lying in a hospital bed, watching on a small screen. But Elena knew she could feel every note. The music reached its climax. The concert hall filled with sound so powerful that it seemed to shake the walls. Elena's entire body moved with the piano, swaying and pressing and reaching. She wasn't just playing the instrument anymore. She had become part of it. The piano was her voice, and she was finally, after all these years, being heard. And then came the ending. The final passage, soft and heartbreaking, like saying goodbye to someone you love. Elena slowed down. Each note hung in the air for a moment before fading away. The last chord rang out, pure and perfect, and then there was silence. Complete silence. Elena sat at the piano with her eyes closed, her hands still resting on the keys. She was breathing hard. Her whole body was trembling. She had given everything she had. There was nothing left inside her. For a moment, nothing happened. The silence stretched on, and Elena felt a flicker of fear. Had she made a mistake? Had she been too emotional? Too raw? Had she embarrassed herself in front of all these important people? And then someone stood up. It was an older man in the third row. He rose to his feet and began to clap. Then, the woman next to him stood up. Then the couple behind them, one by one, like a wave spreading across the ocean, the entire audience rose to their feet. The applause started soft but grew louder and louder until it was thunderous, filling every corner of the concert hall. People were crying. Grown men in expensive suits were wiping their eyes. Women were clutching their chests. Even the other competitors backstage, the ones who had looked down on Elena, stood frozen with shock on their faces. Elena finally opened her eyes and looked out at the audience. She saw hundreds of people on their feet, clapping for her. For her. The maid's daughter. The girl who didn't belong. The girl who had taught herself piano on a piece of cardboard. She stood up slowly and took a bow. Her legs felt weak. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. But she managed to smile. A real smile. The kind she hadn't smiled in a very long time. As she walked off the stage, she passed Valentina. For once, Valentina had nothing cruel to say. She just stared at Elena with wide eyes, her face pale, her expression unreadable. Something had shifted between them, and they both knew it. The judges took a long time to make their decision. The audience waited impatiently, buzzing with conversation. Everyone was talking about the same thing. That girl. That performance. That moment when she said it was for her mom. Finally, the head judge walked to the microphone to announce the results. Third place went to a boy from the capital city. Second place went to another girl who had performed beautifully earlier in the evening. First place went to Valentina Mendoza. The audience clapped politely, but there was confusion in the applause. Murmurs spread through the crowd. People looked at each other with raised eyebrows. Valentina walked to the stage to accept her trophy, but her smile seemed forced. She knew. Everyone knew. The real winner that night wasn't holding a trophy, but the announcements weren't over. The head judge raised his hand to quiet the crowd. He said there was one more award to give, a special recognition. He explained that one of the judges, a renowned music director who had trained pianists for over 40 years, had been so moved by a performance tonight that he wanted to make an offer personally. He called Elena back to the stage. Elena walked out on shaking legs, not understanding what was happening. The old judge met her at the center of the stage. He took her hands in his and looked at her with kind eyes. He told her that in 40 years of listening to piano, he had never felt what he felt tonight. He said that her technique could be polished, her training could continue. But what she had inside her, that fire, that soul, that ability to make people feel, that couldn't be taught, that was a gift. And then he offered her a full scholarship to one of the most famous music schools in the world. Everything paid for. Tuition, housing, living expenses. A chance to train with the best teachers on the planet. A chance to become everything she had ever dreamed of becoming. Elena couldn't speak. She couldn't move. She just stood there, as tears streamed down her face, the audience erupting in applause once again. Later that night, Elena sat in the hospital room next to her mother's bed. Rosa was awake, still weak, but smiling. The tablet she had watched the performance on was still in her hands. Elena told her about the scholarship. She told her about the standing ovation. She told her about the judge's words. But Rosa just shook her head gently. Like none of that mattered. She told Elena that she already knew. She had watched everything. She had heard every note. And she said those notes were the most beautiful gift anyone had ever given her. Elena laid her head on her mother's chest, just like she used to do when she was a little girl. She listened to her mother's heartbeat, steady and strong, and she whispered, "A thank you. Thank you for believing in me. Thank you for sacrificing everything. Thank you for never letting me give up." Rosa stroked her daughter's hair and whispered back. She said she always knew Elena was special. From the very first day she saw her watching that piano in the Mendoza house, She knew. She was just waiting for the rest of the world to see it too. Outside the hospital window, the city lights sparkled against the dark sky. Somewhere out there, a little girl was probably sitting in a corner, watching and dreaming, just like Elena once did. And maybe, just maybe, she would hear this story someday and know that dreams don't care about money or status, or where you come from. Dreams only care about one thing: how badly you want them to come true.